Nah. The morning my father told me I was no longer allowed to go to work, I didn't cry. I looked at him across the kitchen table. His coffee going cold, my brother sitting beside him with that small, satisfied smile, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Clarity. In the past, I would have argued. I would have explained myself, justified myself, apologized for things I hadn't done. I would have made myself smaller, quieter, easier to manage. That was what this family had trained me to do for 28 years. But that morning was different. That morning, I already had a plan. I just said, "Okay, Dad," and I watched his expression shift, confusion replacing triumph, because that was not the answer he had prepared for. Let me start from the beginning, because none of this makes sense without it. I grew up in a 4-bedroom house in a suburb outside Columbus, Ohio. My parents, my younger brother, and me. On paper, we were a normal family. My father worked in insurance. My mother managed the household. My brother played football and got average grades and was treated like he had personally hung the moon above our neighborhood. I was not the golden child. I understood that early. My brother, he's 3 years younger than me, could do almost nothing wrong in my parents' eyes. When he broke a neighbor's window with a baseball at 12, my father paid for it quietly and told him to be more careful. When I accidentally left the back door unlocked at 15 and our dog got out, I was grounded for 2 weeks. When my brother skipped school his junior year 7 times, I counted, my mother called it a phase and hired him a tutor. When I missed 1 shift at my part-time job senior year because I had a 103-degree fever, my father sat me down and gave me a 40-minute lecture about responsibility. I stopped expecting fairness around age 13. By 18, I had a different strategy entirely. I worked, I saved, I planned. While my brother coasted through community college on my parents' money, switching majors twice, dropping a class here and there, I got a full-time job in marketing at a mid-size firm in Columbus. I was good at it. Within 3 years, I was leading campaigns. I paid my own rent. I had my own car. I had a savings account my parents knew nothing about. I also had something else they didn't know about, a job offer from a firm in Chicago. Senior account manager, 40% salary increase, the kind of opportunity that doesn't come twice. I had been planning to tell them at Thanksgiving. I thought, and I understand now how naive this was, that it would be good news, that my father would be proud, that my mother would hug me, that maybe, just once, the table would feel even. I had no idea what that Thanksgiving was actually going to look like. My brother had moved back home 8 months earlier. He was 25, had finished his associate's degree, and had been figuring things out ever since, which in practice meant sleeping until noon, borrowing my parents' car, and asking my father for money with the casual confidence of someone who had never once been told no. He had also started a small landscaping business, which my parents spoke about as though he had founded a Fortune 500 company. My father had given him $6,000 to buy equipment. My mother had designed a logo for him on her laptop. They had both posted about it on Facebook. The business had 3 clients. One of them was our aunt. I am not saying this to be cruel. I am saying it because context matters. And the context is this. I had spent a decade building something real, and my brother had spent the same decade being handed things, and my parents saw both of these situations as evidence of exactly the same thing, that my brother was special, and that I was fine. Fine was not a compliment in our house. Fine meant I didn't need anything. Fine meant I could handle it. Fine meant I could handle it. Fine meant they didn't have to think about me. Thanksgiving that year was at my parents' house, the way it always was. I drove up the night before, Wednesday evening, and my mother had made up my old bedroom. My brother was already there. He was in the living room watching football when I arrived, and he looked up when I walked in and said, "Hey," the way you greet someone you have no particular feelings about. "Hey," I said back. My father came in from the garage. He shook my hand. He had shaken my hand instead of hugging me since I was about 22, though I'm not entirely sure when or why that started, and asked how the drive was. "Fine," I said. He nodded and went back to the garage. That night after dinner, I sat at the kitchen table with my mother while she finished the pies. I decided I would tell her about Chicago first. She was generally more receptive than my father, at least initially. "I have some news," I said. "Something I've been working toward for a while. She looked up from the pie crust with that particular expression she had, half attentive, the way she looked when she was also thinking about something else. "I've been offered a position in Chicago," I said, "senior account manager. It's a significant step up. I'd be leading a whole team." She looked at me for a moment. "Chicago," she said. "Yes, that's very far. It's a 5-hour drive." She was quiet. She looked back at the pie crust and pressed the edge with a fork, the way she always did. Then she said, "Well, we'll talk about it with your father tomorrow." I did not love the word we. I was 28 years old, but I said, "Sure," and I went to bed. I should have known from that conversation how the next day would go. I should have read the silence in it, the slight stiffening of her posture, the way she didn't say congratulations. But I had a habit in those days of assuming the best about my parents that the evidence did not support. Thanksgiving dinner was normal until it wasn't. My father carved the turkey. My mother served the sweet potatoes. My brother talked about a new client he was hoping to land, a property management company, 3 accounts at once, which would double his revenue. My parents listened to him with the full, warm attention I had been chasing my whole life. Then my mother said, "Tell your father what you told me last night." I set down my fork. "I've been offered a job in Chicago," I said. "Senior account manager position. It's a big opportunity." My father chewed, swallowed, looked at me. "Chicago," he said. "Yes." "When?" "January." "I'd start in January." He nodded slowly, not the nod of a man processing good news, the nod of a man deciding something. "Your brother's business is taking off right now," he said. "He's going to need help with the administrative side, invoicing, scheduling, client communication. You're good at that kind of thing." I stared at him. "I have a job," I said. "I know you have a job. I'm saying you could be useful here. This is family." "Dad, I've been offered a senior position at one of the top firms in the Midwest. This is my career. Your brother's building something." His voice was level, certain, the voice he used when a decision had already been made. Families support each other. I looked at my brother. He was looking at his plate, but there was something in the set of his jaw. Not guilt. Something closer to expectation. "I support myself," I said. "I always have." My father looked at me then with an expression I had seen before. Not anger, exactly. Disappointment. As though I had failed a test I hadn't known I was taking. "This attitude," he said, "is exactly the problem." The conversation deteriorated from there. By the time we reached the pie, my father had said that I was selfish, that I had always prioritized myself over family, that my brother had real potential and needed support, and that a good daughter would understand what was being asked of her. My mother said very little. She passed the whipped cream. She agreed with my father when he paused in her direction. My brother said, "At one point, I'm not asking you to do anything." Dad just thought and then stopped when my father held up a hand, as though he were a lawyer managing a witness. "We're not asking," my father said. "We're telling you. You are going to call that company on Monday and you're going to decline the offer, and then we'll talk about what you can do for your brother's business." The table was quiet. "You cannot tell me to turn down a job offer," I said. "I can and I am. I'm 28 years old. You are living under our roof. I'm not living under your roof. I have my own apartment. I have my own carpet. I have my own car. I have paid my own way since I was 22. Your car," my father said, "is registered in this address." He meant the insurance. When I had first bought the car, he'd offered to keep me on their policy. It was cheaper, he said. I had agreed. I was 24. It had seemed like a kindness. Now I understood what it had been. "Until you conduct yourself as a member of this family," my father said, "I will be calling your insurance company Monday morning, and I will be removing you from the policy. And I will be contacting your landlord," he paused, "who is, as I'm sure you remember, your uncle, and asking him to reconsider your lease terms." I had forgotten. In the way that you forget things that you never imagined would be used against you, I had forgotten that my uncle, my father's brother, owned the building where I lived. I had been a good tenant for 4 years. I had never been late on rent. I had thought of the arrangement as incidental. I looked at my father across the Thanksgiving table, the turkey carcass between us, my mother folding her napkin, my brother very still. "Okay," I said. My father blinked. "Okay, Dad," I said again. and I picked up my fork and ate my pie. What my family did not know was this. I had signed the offer letter 3 weeks earlier. The start date was January 6th. That was 63 days away. I had already given notice at my current job, quietly, with a request for confidentiality from my manager, who had known me for 5 years and respected it. My last day was December 20th. I had also, 6 months earlier, begun looking for apartments in Chicago. I had found one. I had paid the deposit. I had signed the lease. I moved in, officially, legally, on December 1st, which was 3 weeks before Thanksgiving. My Columbus apartment, my uncle's building, had 1 month left on its lease. I had already informed the building manager in writing that I would not be renewing. My uncle had not yet been told by the manager. That was standard procedure. He would be notified within the next 30 days. My car insurance had already been transferred to a policy in my own name through my own provider, effective November 1st. I had done it quietly. I had not mentioned it. My father thought he was holding all the cards. He was holding a hand that had already been played. I drove back to Columbus that Sunday with the windows down despite the November cold, and I felt something loosening in my chest that I had not realized was tight. I called my best friend when I got home. She had known about Chicago for months, had helped me find the apartment, had listened to every version of this plan. "How did it go?" she asked. "About how we expected," I said. She was quiet for a moment. "Are you okay?" "I think so," I said. "I think I actually am." The following 3 weeks were the strangest of my life. My father called once to ask if I had made the call to Chicago yet. I told him I was thinking it over. He told me not to take too long. I said I wouldn't. My mother texted a few times. Once to ask if I was coming home for Christmas. Once to send a photo of my brother's new truck. Apparently, the landscaping business had gotten a new client, and my father had co-signed a loan. She texted the photo without commentary, but I understood the commentary. My brother called once. I did not answer. He left a voicemail that said, essentially, that he hoped there were no hard feelings, that this wasn't personal, that family was family. I did not call him back. On December 15th, I loaded a moving truck, a small one, because Chicago apartment, because I had learned to travel light. My friend helped me. We drove in convoy, her following me in her car, through the flat gray Ohio farmland, and across the Indiana border and into the dense, humming sprawl of Chicago. The apartment was on the 3rd floor of a building in Lincoln Square. It had tall windows and a radiator that clanged and a view of a street full of bare trees. I stood in the middle of the empty living room and thought, this is mine. Every inch of it. Nobody co-signed this. Nobody can take it. My last day at my Columbus job was December 20th. My coworkers threw me a small party, sheet cake, paper plates. Someone had made a sign. My manager, who had been with the company for 20 years, took me aside before I left and said, "You're going to do great things." I've known it for a while. I drove away from that office for the last time, and I felt, for the first time in a very long time, like I was exactly where I was supposed to be inside my own life. Christmas Eve, my father called. I was in my Chicago apartment, wrapping gifts for my friend's family. I was spending Christmas with her, the first year I had ever done so. There was snow outside. There was a very small tree in the corner that I had bought at a drugstore and decorated with lights from a dollar bin. I looked at my phone, his name on the screen. I answered. "Merry Christmas, Dad. I want to know," he said, without greeting, "whether you've made the call." "No," I said. "Silence. You have until after Christmas," he said. "Then I'm calling your uncle." "You can call him," I said. My lease ended December 31st. I've already moved out. The building manager has the keys. Another silence. Longer. "What do you mean you've moved out?" "I mean my lease ended. I gave notice in October. I'm not living in Columbus anymore. Where are you living?" "Chicago." The silence this time was different. I could hear him breathing. "You took the job," he said. "I started the job January 6th. I signed the letter in October. You lied to us." I thought about that word. Lied to us. I thought about that word. Lied. I turned it over. "I didn't lie," I said. "I just stopped explaining myself to people who were not going to listen. Your insurance has been in my own name since November 1st. I have the documents if you'd like them. I heard my mother's voice in the background asking something. I heard my father's hand go over the receiver, muffled words. Then her voice rising slightly. Then my brother's voice. Closer to the phone. You can't just do this, he said. He had taken the phone from my father, or my father had handed it to him. I wasn't sure which. This is family. You're supposed to… What? I asked. My voice was even. I had practiced this, not the words, but the tone. Help run your invoicing? Turn down my career? Stay close enough to be useful to you? I'm not angry, I said, enough to be useful to you. I'm not angry, I said, and I meant it, which surprised me a little. I genuinely am not angry, but I also don't owe you my future. I worked for what I have. I planned. I made it happen. And I am very, very glad that I did. Silence. Tell Dad I said Merry Christmas, I said, and to Mom too. I ended the call. I sat for a moment in the quiet of my apartment. The radiator clanged. The lights on my small tree blinked on and off in a slow, cheerful rhythm. Then I finished wrapping the gifts. My friend's family had a real tree, the kind that fills a room with the smell of pine. Her mother cooked enough food for 12 people, though there were only 8 of us. Her father told stories. Her little nephews ran circles around the living room in their pajamas. I sat at that table and ate and laughed and felt, underneath everything, a quiet that I hadn't had in years. Not the quiet of holding myself back, the quiet of someone who doesn't have anything left to brace against. In February, my father called again. He had found out, through my uncle, I assumed, the full timeline, when I had signed the lease in Chicago, when I had given notice on the Columbus apartment, when I had transferred the car insurance. He laid it out on the phone like evidence in a case, as though the sequence of it was the damning part. You were planning this, he said, while you were at our table. Yes, I said. While you were telling me to give up my career to do my brother's invoicing. Yes. He was quiet. I spent a long time waiting for things to be fair, I said. I spent a long time thinking that if I was good enough, patient enough, successful enough, it would eventually register. I stopped waiting. We're your family, he said. I know, I said. I know you are, and I'm not cutting you off. I'm not telling you I never want to hear from you, but I'm also not going to shrink my life to fit what's convenient for someone else. Not anymore. He didn't have an answer for that. Or if he did, he didn't say it. My brother's landscaping business closed in March. The property management company deal fell through. The equipment loan defaulted. My father handled it. My father, I was told by my aunt, who had always been more honest with me than anyone else in the family, was frustrated, which in our family's vocabulary meant furious and embarrassed in equal measure. I did not feel vindicated, exactly. I felt something more complicated than that. Something adjacent to sadness, because nothing about this was what I had wanted. I had not wanted to be right. I had wanted to be treated like I was worth something at my own family's table. That you cannot want someone into seeing you. You can only decide whether you're going to stay in the room waiting for it. I had been in Chicago for 8 months when my mother called. Not my father. My mother, which was unusual. She called on a Sunday afternoon when I was at the farmer's market near my apartment, and I stepped to the side of the path to answer. I want to come visit, she said, if that's all right with you. I paused. Just me, she said. I'd like to see where you live. She came the following weekend. I picked her up from the train station. She had taken the train from Columbus, 4.5 hours, which for my mother, who did not travel alone, was significant. She had a rolling suitcase and her good winter coat, and she looked slightly overwhelmed by Union Station, which is fair because Union Station is overwhelming. I took her to my apartment. She walked through it slowly. She stood at the tall windows and looked at the street below. It's nice, she said, and her voice had something in it I hadn't heard before. I don't know how to describe it except as recognition. Like she was seeing something she hadn't let herself see. We had dinner at a restaurant around the corner. She ordered the salmon. I ordered the pasta. We talked, carefully at first, and then less carefully. She talked about when she was young, before my father, before us, when she had almost taken a job in another city and hadn't. She said it as a fact, without self-pity. But I understood what she was telling me. She stayed 2 nights. When I dropped her at the station on Sunday, she hugged me, really hugged me, the way she used to when I was small, and said, I'm proud of you. I stood on the platform after her train pulled away and cried for about 4 minutes, not from sadness. From something that felt like a door opening in my chest that had been closed for a very long time. My father and I don't talk often. When we do, it is careful, surface level, the conversation of two people who love each other in a way that is complicated by too much history. I don't know if that will change. I have stopped needing it to change in order to be okay. My brother and I are not in contact. I wish him well in the general, distant way you can wish someone well when you've accepted that your relationship is not what you once hoped it would be. I lead a team of 11 people now. We just won a regional award for a campaign I built from scratch. My apartment still has the drugstore tree in December because I liked it and bought it again. The radiator still clangs. Last month, I had coffee with a woman I met at a work event who had grown up in a similar situation, the invisible child, the one who was fine. And she asked me, at some point in the conversation, how I had finally managed to leave. I thought about it. I stopped asking permission, I said. I just got very quiet and very prepared. And when the moment came, I was already gone. She nodded slowly, like she was writing something down inside herself. The hard part, I said, isn't leaving. The hard part is accepting that leaving. The hard part is accepting that leaving was the right thing even when it still hurts. Even when you still wanted them to be different. Even when part of you will always be the kid at that table, passing the sweet potatoes, hoping this time it would be your name, they said with that warmth. She was quiet for a moment. Does it get easier? She asked. Yes, I said. It gets easier when you fill your life up with things that are actually yours. Things nobody helped you get. Things nobody can threaten to take. I meant the job. I meant the apartment. I meant the team of 11 people who looked to me on Monday mornings. But I also meant the Sunday farmers market and the clanging radiator and my friends' nephews in their Christmas pajamas and my mother on a train she booked herself, walking through my door with her rolling suitcase, finally ready to see me. Those things are mine too. All of them, mine. There's something nobody tells you about the families that hold you back. They don't always do it out of cruelty. Sometimes they do it out of habit. Sometimes they do it because the system works for them, and they have never had reason to examine whether it works for you. That doesn't make it acceptable. But understanding it was the thing that finally freed me from the anger I'd been carrying for years. I spent a long time believing that if I worked hard enough, proved enough, achieved enough, the people at that table would eventually look at me differently. What I didn't understand was that the way they looked at me had nothing to do with what I did. It had everything to do with what I represented. The child who didn't need anything, the one who would be fine, the one whose future could be redirected when it became convenient for someone else. What changed for me was not a single moment of courage. It was a slow, quiet accumulation of decisions. I opened my own bank account. I transferred my own insurance. I signed my own lease. I gave my own notice. None of those things felt dramatic when I did them. They felt like maintenance. Like someone quietly reinforcing the walls of a house that is entirely her own. And when the storm came, when my father laid out his ultimatums at that Thanksgiving table, there was nothing left to threaten. The house was already built. He just didn't know it yet. That is what I want anyone in a similar situation to understand. The goal is not the confrontation. The goal is the preparation that makes the confrontation irrelevant. You don't win by arguing louder. You win by being so thoroughly, quietly ready that when someone reaches for the leverage they think they have over you, their hand closes on air. Intelligence without action is only potential. Action without preparation is only noise. What actually moves a life forward is the combination, knowing what you want, planning carefully, and moving without asking permission from people who have already demonstrated they will not give it. My brother's business failed not because the market was against him, but because he had spent his entire life being handed things and had never learned to build anything on his own. My father's ultimatums failed not because I was smarter, but because I had spent years doing exactly the opposite, earning, planning, preparing, quietly. The outcomes were not random. They were the direct result of how each of us had chosen to move through the world. I am not telling this story to shame anyone in my family. I am telling it because I spent too many years thinking that my situation was fixed, that the family you were born into determines what you are allowed to become. It does not. What determines what you become is whether you are willing to do the unglamorous, unwitnessed work of building your own foundation, even when no one is watching, even when no one is cheering, even when the people who are supposed to believe in you are busy believing in someone else. My mother came to Chicago on a train she booked herself. She walked through my apartment and said she was proud of me. That meant more than I can explain, but I want to be honest. I had already decided to be okay before she said it. The life I built does not depend on whether anyone in that house ever comes around. That is the only kind of freedom that actually holds.